Okay, everyone, welcome back to another IELTS writing video. This time we're going to be looking at the area of describing data. Now, I'm not sure how much you're looking forward to a video like this, but if you are doing the academic IELTS, it is very important that you study this area. And that is because on writing task 1 of the academic IELTS, you could be presented with a line graph, a bar chart, or anything like this, which contains a lot of data. And you basically have to describe what the chart or the graph shows, okay? Now remember, you don't need to go into detail about why the data might be as it is. You've just got to explain the data patterns. And even though this can seem quite complicated, you actually only really need to draw upon quite predictable phrases in many cases, and make sure you use the right grammatical tense to describe the data patterns. Now, in many IELTS Task 1 writings with the academic IELTS, usually you have to talk about data in the past that relates to the present. So we're going to be looking over a particular past tense that should help you with this task. However, you will need to adapt this depending on whether the data shown is in the past, present, or future. Okay, but usually it is in the past, even leading to the present. But we will be focusing on past trends today, and a past tense and some vocabulary strategies that will help you. So without further ado, let's get into it now, and I will share my screen with you. Okay, everyone, so let's say that you're presented with either a chart or a graph of some kind, and you've got data that goes back into the past. Well, a useful tense that you will possibly need for a question like this is the past perfect. And there are 4 tenses, technically, in the past, 4 proper tenses, and these are the past simple, past continuous, past perfect, and the past perfect continuous. Now, we're going to highlight the past perfect today because I feel that this can be a little bit underused, especially in spoken English. So for something more academic, like describing charts, something like this is going to be quite useful to you, I think. Now, before we get into that, let's just look at the basic structure and principles of the past perfect now. So, as you can see over here, I've got a bit of a timeline. If the end of the arrow is now, then before it, you've got 2 actions, okay? So this is basically the core of the past perfect, and we'll just look at the quick definition here. It is basically used to state the past of the past, all right? And it's not usually something you use on your own. You can, but we'll explain how a little later. But it is usually used with the past simple tense. So this is why up here I've written PP for the first action and PS for the second action. So past perfect and past simple. So in a sentence with 2 actions, the first action, the first thing that happens, should take the past perfect tense, okay? And the second thing that happens should take the past simple tense. So let's look at an example down here. So by the time I got to the theatre, the film had already started, okay? Now, as you can see, I'm actually not putting the first action first, and this is why this is useful. You can put the second action first, and of course, you'll know which action comes first because of phrases like by the time, which basically means before. You can replace it here with the word before, but you can also use the word after. But either way, the action that happens first should get this past perfect structure, and we haven't been over that yet. So that would be the subject, so a name, or I, you, he, she, for example. Then the auxiliary verb had, and then the past participle of the main verb. So if you're not sure what the past participle is, Well, in regular verbs, it's always going to be ed. So, for example, play, played, played. So that third played or third form of the verb is the past participle. Kick, kick, kicked, kicked. Okay, any of these ed forms, but with irregular forms, then they change. So, for example, go, went, gone. Okay, so gone would be the past participle. Or, for example, even one where it's the same. So tell, told, told. It's still not ed, so that's still the third form, told. Okay. So now, as I've written down here, the past simple tense isn't always necessary as long as you are referring to something that happened before a particular point in the past. And we'll get into this in just a second with data examples. But there's just one more point I want to make, and that is the past perfect tense normally gets overlooked in spoken English. And you normally kind of just hear two past simples when you're describing something basic. So, for example, I went to bed after I washed the dishes. Okay. When you're explaining a sequence of events and you don't use the past perfect, no one's going to correct you. That is how we speak in English. Now, you could highlight the first action with the past perfect, but in spoken English, this kind of gets left out. And the reason for that is because if you say, I went to bed after I had washed my dishes, or washed the dishes, that's fine. But then had washed with a contraction becomes I'd. So I had becomes I'd washed the dishes. And then in the end, if you're speaking quickly, you don't even hear the D. I went to bed after I'd washed the dishes. Okay. So this is why a lot of students don't hear many examples of the past perfect in spoken English. But there are examples where you do have to use it. And I'll give you an example that refers to this. So let's give you another one. I'll give you something that sounds a bit weird to a native speaker. So before that Paris trip, I was never in France, or before that Paris trip, I never went to France. That doesn't sound so good. That doesn't emphasize that you've never been to France before. So that's what you need to say. Before that Paris trip, I had never been to France before. And that's when it's noticeable. Okay. So this is why we're going to give a few more examples now related to data. So let's look at a graph here. Let's say you're looking at the price of oil in the 1980s, something like this. So you could say by 1986, the price of oil had fallen sharply. Okay. So not fell, you would say had fallen. Okay. Price of oil, subject, had, and then fall, fell, fallen is your past participle. So the reason for this is that 1986 is a point in the past, and we are explaining what happened until that point. So the past perfect tense is still appropriate here. Okay. And this is the kind of way you'll need to describe your data. By is also a very good way of talking about what happened before a particular point in time as well. Okay, to finish off with this screen, collocations. Now, even what I've written here, fallen sharply, that is a verb and adverb collocation. So what are these? These are words that match to make fixed phrases and are commonly used when describing data patterns. Now, we're going to get into collocations a little more in the next lesson, so don't worry too much about them now. But there are a series of predictable phrases that you might hear when describing data, and I've put some of them down here. So to fall sharply, as I've put here, you could even use an adjective-noun combination. So there has been a marked drop in the price of oil. You could say, for example, the price of oil experienced a good growth rate in the latter half of the decade. You could say the price of oil was on an upward trend. That's another collocation. And as I say, this will be good for describing data, but we'll get more into the area of collocations in a future video. Otherwise, that's all from me. So as always, thank you very much for joining me in another video. If you are working on my website, you can scroll down now to do the following exercises. The first one will be testing some of those collocations that we looked at in the video, along with the tense patterns. And then below that, you will have a chance to do a writing task 1 for yourselves. So I look forward to seeing your work. And if you haven't bought my course, then again, please consider doing so to make the most out of these videos. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone, and I will see you soon.